The Valdran Empire had ruled the eastern spiral arm of the galaxy for over 200 years. Their ships were massive, and their weapons could turn entire planets into dust. Every species they met either joined them willingly or was crushed under their military might. 17 star systems had fallen to their fleets, and not once had they faced real resistance. The Valdran soldiers were trained from birth to fight, and their generals had never lost a battle. When their long-range scouts detected a small blue planet orbiting an average yellow star, they saw nothing special. The third planet in the system showed signs of primitive technology. Radio signals bounced around the planet in chaotic patterns. Simple satellites orbited in low atmosphere. A few basic ships floated near a tiny gray moon. The scouts sent their report back to the Empire, and the response was immediate. This world would be added to the collection. Captain Jake Morrison was eating breakfast in the officers' mess when the alarm went off. He dropped his coffee and ran to the bridge of the ESS Defender. The ship was humanity's newest deep space frigate, built in secret over the past 5 years in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Morrison had commanded her for only 3 months, but he knew every system by heart. His crew was small, just 40 people, but they were the best Earth had to offer. Lieutenant Amy Carter was already at her station when Morrison arrived. She pointed to the main screen where a message was being decoded. The message was in a language no human had ever seen before, but the translation software worked quickly. Within minutes, the words appeared on the screen in plain English. The message was simple and cold. It said that the primitive species of the third planet had been selected for incorporation into the Valdran Empire. All military forces were to power down immediately. All governments were to prepare for transition of authority. Resistance would result in complete destruction from orbit. The species had 72 hours to comply. Morrison read the message 3 times. Around him, the bridge crew sat in stunned silence. Carter finally spoke up and asked if this was really happening. Morrison nodded slowly. First contact with alien life, and it was an invasion force. He asked Carter to open a channel to Earth Command. Within seconds, his screen showed General Frank Pierce sitting in his office deep below Colorado. Pierce had already seen the message. His face was grim but not surprised. Morrison asked for orders, and Pierce told him to hold position and wait. Then Pierce smiled slightly and asked Morrison if he wanted to send humanity's response. Morrison understood immediately what Pierce meant. For 50 years, humanity had been preparing for this exact moment. After the Cold War ended and the nuclear powers stopped pointing missiles at each other, a new question emerged. What if the threat came from above instead of across the ocean? What if first contact was not peaceful? Every military on Earth had quietly shifted focus. New weapons were designed. New tactics were developed. Satellites were launched that had nothing to do with communication or weather monitoring. The moon base that the public thought was for scientific research was actually something very different, and every soldier, every pilot, every commander had been briefed on the same protocol. If hostile aliens ever showed up, humanity would not beg for mercy. Morrison told Pierce he would be honored to send the response. He turned to Carter and told her to open all channels. Broadcast on every frequency the Valdran had used and every other frequency humanity could generate. Make sure the message was translated into their language and standard galactic and anything else in the database. Carter worked quickly, and within 5 minutes she nodded. The channel was open. Morrison took a breath and spoke clearly into the microphone. He identified himself and his species. He thanked the Valdran Empire for their message. Then he delivered humanity's response. He told them that Earth had received their surrender demand and wanted to offer some advice in return. "Run now," he said. "Run while you still can." Then he closed the channel and waited. On the Valdran flagship, Admiral Krell listened to the human response with his command staff. When the translation finished, the bridge was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Krell began to laugh. His officers joined in, and soon the entire command deck was filled with the clicking and chirping sounds of Valdran amusement. The communications officer asked if they should respond to the obvious joke. Krell waved a manipulator appendage dismissively. There was no need to respond to primitives who did not understand their situation. The human ship that had sent the message was barely the size of a Valdran shuttle. Their entire fleet numbered 23 vessels. The invasion force had 4,000 ships, 4,000 against 23. The humans had kinetic weapons that threw pieces of metal through space. The Valdran had quantum disruptors that could tear apart molecular bonds. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution, but Intelligence Officer Vera Danes was not laughing. She floated in the zero-gravity section of the ISS Freedom Station, humanity's largest orbital platform. Her screens showed data streaming in from every sensor array Earth had deployed across the solar system. The Valdrin fleet was massive, bigger than anyone had expected, but Vera had spent 5 years studying every piece of information humanity had gathered about potential alien technology. She had helped design the countermeasures. She knew what was hidden throughout the solar system. She knew about the mines drifting in the asteroid belt. She knew about the railgun platforms camouflaged as space debris. She knew about the cyber warfare packages that had been prepared for this exact scenario. And she knew something the Valdrin did not know. Humanity had been fighting wars for thousands of years. Humans had learned every dirty trick, every ambush strategy, every way to turn weakness into advantage. The Valdrin were about to get a very painful education. The enemy fleet began moving toward Earth at half-light speed. They would arrive in 4 days. Across Earth, every military force went to full alert. Missiles were armed. Pilots climbed into cockpits. Ships left their docks and took up positions. General Pierce sent out the final orders to all commands. Hold until they cross the Mars orbital line, then show them what humanity can do. In living rooms and offices and streets around the world, people watched the news with fear and determination mixed together. They had been told this might happen someday. They had been promised that Earth would not go down without a fight. Now that promise would be tested. The Valdrin Empire was coming and they expected an easy victory. They were about to learn their first lesson about humanity. Humans do not surrender easily, and they definitely do not surrender without making the enemy pay for every inch. The Valdrin Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system in perfect formation. 4,000 warships arranged in precise geometric patterns that had been perfected over centuries of conquest. The smallest vessels were corvettes the size of aircraft carriers. The largest were dreadnoughts that could be seen from planetary surfaces. Each ship gleamed with polished metal alloys that reflected starlight. Their weapons were charged and ready. Their shields hummed with power. Admiral Krell stood on the bridge of his flagship and felt the familiar satisfaction of another easy victory approaching. His sensor officer reported that the human fleet was clustered around their homeworld exactly as expected. 23 ships trying to protect a single planet. It was almost sad. Commander Lisa Hayes sat in the Deep Space Command Center buried 2 miles beneath the mountains of Colorado. She had been in this chair for 36 hours straight and had no intention of leaving until the battle was over. Around her, hundreds of technicians monitored screens that showed every corner of the solar system. The Valdrin fleet was passing Neptune's orbit now, heading inward at a steady speed. They were not rushing. They clearly did not consider Earth a threat. Hayes allowed herself a small smile. That was exactly what humanity needed them to think. Her tactical officer Ben Clark stood at her shoulder and reported that all systems were ready. The minefield was active. The railgun platforms were charged. The fleet was in position. Every hidden weapon humanity had scattered across the solar system over the past 30 years was armed and waiting. Hayes told Clark to hold fire. Let the enemy come closer. Let them think they were winning right up until the moment they learned the truth. The Valdrin detected nothing unusual as they crossed into the inner solar system. Their sensors showed exactly what they expected to see. A primitive planet with primitive defenses. Some satellites orbiting. Some debris floating. Nothing that posed any threat to an empire that had conquered 17 star systems. What their sensors did not show were the millions of autonomous defense satellites that had been deliberately designed to look like space junk. What their technology could not detect were the electromagnetic mines drifting on trajectories that appeared random, but were actually precisely calculated. What their intelligence had completely missed was that humanity had been planning for interstellar war since the 1950s. Every space program had a secret military purpose. Every satellite launch had carried weapons disguised as scientific equipment. The International Space Station was just the public face of humanity's orbital infi. RAS structure. The real defenses were hidden in plain sight. Clark watched his screens as the Valdrin crossed the orbit of Mars. That was the line. That was where humanity would make its stand. He reported the enemy position to Hayes, and she nodded once. Her voice was calm and steady when she gave the order. Fire. But she did not mean fire weapons. Not yet. The first attack was something the Valdrin had never experienced before. Every ship in their fleet suddenly found its navigation systems going haywire. Computers that had functioned perfectly for decades started displaying error messages in languages that should not exist in their programming. Communication channels filled with so much garbage data that nothing real could get through. Targeting computers locked up in endless calculation loops. Shields flickered as their control systems received conflicting commands. In exactly 3 seconds, humanity's cyber warfare division achieved something that most species considered impossible. They hacked an alien computer system they had never seen before, using principles of logic and mathematics that were universal across all technology. Admiral Krell stared at his screens in confusion as his beautiful armada began to fall apart. Systems failed across multiple ships simultaneously. His communications officer tried to restore contact with the fleet, but the channels were chaos. His weapons officer reported that targeting solutions were impossible to calculate. His shield technician said the defensive screens were fluctuating randomly. Krell demanded to know what was happening, but nobody had answers. Then the mines detonated. Hundreds of electromagnetic pulse weapons that had been drifting through space like forgotten debris suddenly activated in perfect synchronization. Waves of energy washed over the Valdrin formation. Every ship had its shields already weakened by the cyber attack. Now those shields collapsed completely. Power systems overloaded and circuit breakers failed. Backup systems tried to activate, but they had been compromised too. 300 Valdrin warships went dark and began drifting helplessly through space. Hayes watched the tactical display light up with successful hits. 300 ships disabled in the opening move. Not destroyed, not yet, but helpless and blind. She told Clark to launch the missiles. Now the real attack would begin. Across the solar system, hidden platforms that the Valdrin had dismissed as asteroids or debris suddenly opened up. Missile tubes that had been built into the surfaces of rocks and ice released their payloads. Not hundreds of missiles, not thousands, millions. Humanity had spent 30 years building the cheapest, simplest, most reliable missiles possible. Each one cost less than a family car. Each one was guided by an artificial intelligence that could think and adapt on its own. Each one traveled at a significant fraction of light speed, and there were millions of them. The Valdrin fleet detected the incoming missiles and tried to respond. Point defense systems activated on the ships that still had power. Energy weapons fired in desperate patterns. Some missiles were destroyed, but for every missile that exploded, 10 more got through. They slammed into Valdrin hulls with kinetic energy that turned metal into vapor. Ships that had survived battles across 17 star systems were torn apart by weapons that had cost less than the coffee makers in their crew quarters. Admiral Krell watched in horror as his fleet was shredded. Cruisers exploded in brilliant flashes. Destroyers broke in half. Frigates tumbled away, trailing atmosphere and debris. In the first 10 minutes of actual combat, he had lost a fifth of his invasion force. 800 ships. 800 ships destroyed or disabled by a species that was not supposed to have interstellar weapons at all. Krell screamed orders at his crew. Return fire. Destroy everything. Kill them all. The Valdrin ships that still had working weapons opened fire with everything they had. Quantum disruptors lit up the darkness of space with beams of purple energy. Several human platforms disintegrated instantly. The ESS Defender took a direct hit that tore through its hull and sent it spinning into the void. But for every human asset destroyed, a dozen more appeared from hiding spots the Valdrin had not known existed. Railgun batteries on the moon opened fire. Laser platforms hidden in Earth orbit activated. Fighter squadrons launched from carriers that had been disguised as mining ships. Humanity had turned its entire solar system into a weapon, and now that weapon was fully deployed. Captain Kyle. Sanders pulled his fighter through a hard turn that would have killed him if not for the inertial dampening system. He lined up a Valdrin cruiser in his sights and fired a burst of tungsten penetrators. The metal slugs hit the alien ship at relativistic speeds and punched straight through its armor. Internal explosions rippled along its hull and the cruiser began to break apart. Sanders called to his squadron and reminded them of their training. These things were not gods. They were just targets with bigger shields. His pilots responded with determined voices and dove back into the fight. More Valdrin ships exploded under concentrated fire from the nimble human fighters. On Earth, billions of people watched the battle through every screen they could find. News channels broadcast the tactical displays. Social media exploded with commentary and prayer and defiance. They had been warned this might happen. They had been told that first contact might be hostile. But they had also been promised that humanity would not surrender. That promise was being kept in fire and blood and the wreckage of alien warships. As the first day of battle ended, the Valdren had lost 800 ships. Humanity had lost about 40% of its fixed defenses and several ships. The numbers still favored the invaders, but the mathematics had changed. This was no longer an execution. It was a war, and humanity was very, very good at war. Admiral Krell pulled his remaining forces back to Jupiter's orbit to regroup and analyze what had gone so terribly wrong. His fleet still numbered over 3,000 ships, but the confidence that had filled his bridge just days ago was completely gone. Officers spoke in quiet voices and avoided eye contact. The humans had done the impossible. They had hurt the Valdren Empire badly. Krell called his senior staff together and demanded answers. How had primitives defeated advanced technology? How had a species that barely reached its own moon destroyed 800 warships? His chief analyst pulled up data on the main screen and began explaining what they had learned. The humans used completely decentralized warfare. Every platform operated independently. Every ship made its own decisions. Destroying their command structure achieved nothing because there was no single command structure to destroy. Each unit adapted and responded to the battle in real time without waiting for orders from above. It was chaos made into strategy, and it was brutally effective. Krell's mandibles clicked together in frustration. His empire had always fought with clear hierarchies and organized formations. Discipline and order were the foundations of Valdren military doctrine. But these humans fought like insects, like swarms, like water flowing around obstacles. He asked his tactical officer what could be done, and the answer was simple: adapt or die. The Valdren would have to change their approach. If they could not engage the human fleet in open battle, they would simply destroy the planet from orbit. Krell ordered his ships into planetary siege formation. All vessels would move into high orbit around Earth and begin systematic bombardment of military installations. Without their bases and platforms, the humans would have nothing left to fight with. It was brutal but effective, and the Empire had used this strategy on 6 previous worlds. Lieutenant Colonel Greg Palmer sat in Cheyenne Mountain coordinating humanity's response to the Valdren withdrawal. The mountain complex had been built during the Cold War to survive nuclear strikes, and now it served as redundant Command Alpha. Palmer had 3 other command centers he could switch to if this one was destroyed. He watched the enemy fleet regroup near Jupiter and knew exactly what they were planning. The aliens would try orbital bombardment next. It was the logical move. Humans had studied every military strategy ever used, and Palmer had written papers on siege warfare in his years at the Academy. He knew what was coming, and he knew how to counter it. He told his staff to prepare for the next phase. The Valdren needed to stay still long enough to target ground installations accurately. That meant they would be sitting targets themselves. And humanity had a surprise waiting for them. The Valdren fleet moved into high orbit around Earth in a formation designed to provide overlapping fields of fire. Every major human military base would be hit simultaneously. Every command center would be destroyed in the first salvo. Krell watched his screens as targeting solutions were calculated. Power readings climbed as the main weapons charged. In 5 minutes, the bombardment would begin, and the humans would learn that resistance was futile. But then something impossible happened. The moon opened fire. The entire lunar surface erupted with weapons fire. Railguns that had been hidden under fake regolith and inside artificial craters began launching projectiles at escape velocity. Hundreds of tungsten rods, each weighing several tons and moving at orbital speeds, streaked toward the Valdren formation. The aliens detected the attack too late. Their ships were focused on Earth below and not the moon above. The first impacts were devastating. Major Sophie Grant coordinated the lunar defense from Armstrong Base, which the public believed was just a scientific research station. In reality, it was the largest weapons platform humanity had ever built. The entire base was buried under 30 feet of lunar rock. Railguns extended from hidden bunkers across 50 square miles of surface. Grant watched her tactical display light up with successful hits and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Years of construction in secret. Years of moving equipment under cover of normal supply missions. Years of training crews who had to pretend they were just scientists studying moon rocks. All of it was paying off now. She called out target priorities to her gun crews. Focus on their capital ships first. The big dreadnoughts were slow and made perfect targets. Every shot had to count because the railguns needed time to cool between firings. The Valdrin flagship shuddered as a tungsten rod punched through its starboard shield generator. Alarms blared across the bridge and Krell grabbed his command chair to steady himself. Another impact hit the port side. Then another struck amidships. His shield officer reported multiple breaches and failing containment fields. Krell ordered all ships to break formation and scatter, but it was too late. The humans had perfect firing solutions. Satellites around Earth triangulated positions. Artificial intelligence systems predicted trajectories. The railguns almost never missed. A Valdrin dreadnought exploded as a penetrator hit its reactor core. Another capital ship broke in half. Cruisers and destroyers took damage as the lunar barrage continued without pause. Captain Danny Foster checked his instruments one last time as his ship approached the Valdrin fleet. The ESS Revenant was officially listed as a cargo hauler in the Earth Fleet Registry. That was technically true. It could carry cargo. But right now it was carrying something very specific. The entire cargo bay had been filled with antimatter containment pods connected to the ship's reactor in a configuration that violated every safety protocol ever written. Foster was flying a bomb with engines attached, and he was heading straight into the middle of the enemy formation. His co-pilot had volunteered for this mission, but Foster had refused to bring anyone else. This was a one-way trip, and he would not take someone else's life with him. He keyed his radio and contacted command to report his position. Beginning final approach now. The voice on the other end wished him luck, and Foster smiled.
He did not need luck.
He just needed to get close enough. The Valdrin point defense systems tracked the approaching human ship, but their targeting computers were still compromised from the earlier cyber attacks. They fired wildly and missed. Foster flew his ship like he was racing through canyons back home in Nevada. He had learned to fly in illegal hoverbike races where the slightest mistake meant death. This was no different, except the stakes were higher. He dodged around destroyed Valdrin vessels and slipped through gaps in their formation. Weapons fire lit up space around him, but none of it connected. His ship took a few glancing hits, but the reactor stayed stable. That was all that mattered. He selected his target, a massive Valdrin carrier that was trying to launch more fighters. Foster pushed his engines to maximum and aimed straight for the carrier's launch bay. In the last seconds before impact, he thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 7 years old and loved to draw pictures of spaceships. Maybe someday she would draw a picture of this moment. Maybe someday she would understand why her father had to do this. The Revenant crashed into the carrier at full speed. The impact drove the cargo ship deep into the larger vessel's interior. Then Foster triggered the reactor overload. The antimatter containment failed exactly as designed. Matter met antimatter in quantities that should never exist outside of laboratory conditions. The explosion was visible from Earth as a new star briefly appearing in orbit. When the light faded, the carrier was gone. So were 16 other Valdrin ships that had been too close. Foster's last transmission reached Earth 3 seconds before the detonation. Just 2 words, worth it. Nobody listening would ever forget those words or the man who spoke them. President Helen Brooks addressed the world from a secure bunker in Virginia. The room around her was filled with military advisors and civilian officials who had been evacuated from Washington. She looked directly into the camera and spoke with a voice that did not waver. She told everyone watching that Earth had known this day might come. Humanity had prepared for the worst, and now the worst had arrived. But they were not giving up. They were not surrendering. They were proving what humans had always known deep in their bones. We do not quit. We do not break. We make them pay for every inch. The Valdrin Empire had come expecting easy conquest. Instead, they were learning what it meant to fight a species that had been at war with itself for thousands of years. Every trick, every strategy, every ruthless tactic that humans had developed fighting each other was now being used against the invaders. The galaxy was about to learn something new. Humanity was not prey. By the 5th day of the war, Admiral Krell's fleet had been reduced to 1,800 ships. Half his armada was either destroyed or drifting dead in space. His communications with the Valdrin High Council had become increasingly desperate and angry. He transmitted reports that described the humans as savages who fought without honor. They used suicide tactics. They employed automated weapons. They attacked from hiding like cowards instead of meeting the fleet in honest battle. These were not the actions of a civilized species. The response from the Empire's capital world was cold and unforgiving. Krell had left with 4,000 ships to conquer one primitive planet. If he could not complete this simple task, perhaps he was not worthy of his rank. The High Council expected results, not excuses. Krell knew what that meant. If he failed here, he would be executed as an example. Failure was not tolerated in the Valdren Empire. Krell made a decision that he had hoped to avoid. The Empire possessed a weapon that was used only in the most extreme circumstances. It was called the Planetary Cracker, and it did exactly what the name suggested. The device could be deployed in orbit and would generate a resonance field that destabilized a planet's core. Within hours, the planet would tear itself apart from within. It was a weapon of last resort because it destroyed everything, including any resources the Empire might have wanted. But Krell was out of options and out of time. He sent orders for the device to be brought forward from the reserve fleet. It would arrive in 2 days. Then Earth would die and the humans would finally understand the cost of resistance, Commander. Kate Walsh operated from the submarine USS Defiance, somewhere deep in the Pacific Ocean. Humanity had learned long ago not to put all its command centers on land or in space. The ocean was vast and deep and perfect for hiding critical infrastructure. Walsh and her crew monitored Valdren communications constantly. The aliens used encryption that was sophisticated but not perfect. Human computers working in parallel had cracked most of their codes by day 3. When the order for the planetary cracker went out, Walsh's communications officer brought her the translated message immediately. Walsh read it twice and then contacted General Paul Dixon at Pacific Command. She told him the Valdren were bringing in something new, something big. The translation was imperfect, but her linguist believed it was a planet-killer weapon. Dixon's response was immediate and clear. Then we kill it first. Get me every asset we have left. Everything that can still fly or shoot. We hit them with everything at once. What remained of Earth's military assembled for what everyone knew would be the final battle. Every fighter that could still fly. Every ship that had working weapons. Every pilot who could still climb into a cockpit. They came from bases on Earth and Mars and the asteroid belt. They came from hidden facilities and damaged platforms. Some ships were held together with emergency patches. Some fighters had bullet holes in their hulls. But they all came when called because this was it. This was the moment that would decide whether humanity survived or died. Commander Ryan Mitchell led the attack wing from his battered frigate. He broadcast on all channels so every human pilot could hear. This is not a suicide mission, he told them. This is a very dangerous mission that we are all planning to survive. Our target is the Valdren Dreadnought at coordinates Delta 7. Intelligence says that's where the planet-killer weapon is located. We destroy that ship and we save Earth. It's that simple. The human fleet launched toward the Valdren formation in a coordinated wave that the aliens initially interpreted as a final, desperate attack. Krell watched the approaching ships on his tactical display and felt a grim satisfaction. Finally, the humans were coming out to face him in open battle. Finally, he could destroy them properly. He ordered all ships to prepare for fleet engagement. This would be the end of human resistance. But the humans did not engage in a traditional fleet battle. Instead, they dove into the Valdren formation like a swarm of angry insects. Small fighters sacrificed themselves to kill larger ships. Damaged frigates rammed into cruisers. Human pilots did things that no rational commander would ever order, because they broke every rule of military tactics. But they worked. The Valdren formation fell apart as ships tried to track dozens of small, fast targets that attacked from random angles. Mitchell guided his ship through the chaos toward the dreadnought that held the planet cracker. Valdren defenders fired everything they had, but the human ships kept coming. A fighter exploded to Mitchell's left. A frigate broke apart to his right. But the attack continued because every human in the fleet knew what was at stake. They pushed forward through the fire and the death until they reached the dreadnought. Mitchell ordered all ships to concentrate fire on that single target. Missiles, railguns, lasers, everything humanity had left was thrown at that one ship. The dreadnought's shields held it first, but they were designed to fight capital ships, not swarms of small attackers. The shields began to flicker under the concentrated assault. Back on Earth, Dr. Ellen Price had been working without sleep since the war began. She was a physicist who specialized in energy systems and had been studying the wreckage of destroyed Valdren ships. Humanity had collected hundreds of pieces of alien technology from the battlefield. Price and her team had been taking it apart and trying to understand how it worked. On day 4, she made a breakthrough. The Valdren quantum disruptors. The main weapons that made their ships so dangerous required a very specific harmonic frequency to function. The frequency had to be precise or the quantum field would collapse. If someone could generate an interference pattern on that exact frequency, the weapons would stop working. Price brought her findings to Colonel Patricia Hughes, who commanded the research division. Hughes asked if Price could actually do this. Generate a signal strong enough to affect ships in orbit. Price said maybe. Give me 12 hours and access to every radio telescope on the planet. She got 8 hours and 17 telescopes. It had to be enough. Price and her team worked frantically to synchronize the telescopes and calculate the exact interference pattern needed. They had one chance to get this right. If the frequency was wrong by even a tiny amount, nothing would happen. Price checked her calculations over and over. The mathematics was solid. The theory was sound. But theory and reality were different things. She told Hughes they were ready. Hughes contacted Mitchell and told him to stand by for a signal. When the signal broadcast, the Valdrin weapons should go offline. Should was not a word that inspired confidence, but it was all they had. Mitchell acknowledged and prepared his fleet for what came next. The radio telescopes activated in perfect synchronization. They broadcast a signal that was calculated down to 17 decimal places. The signal raced up from Earth at the speed of light and washed over the Valdrin fleet in orbit. For 3 seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then every Valdrin quantum disruptor shut down simultaneously. The aliens' main weapons, the weapons that had conquered 17 star systems, simply stopped working. Krell stared at his console in disbelief. His weapons officer reported that all disruptors were offline. The quantum fields had collapsed. His science officer ran diagnostics and looked up with shock on his alien features. The humans had figured out their technology and created a countermeasure. In less than 1 week, they had reverse-engineered weapon systems that had taken the Valdrin centuries to develop. Mitchell saw the Valdrin weapons go dark and did not waste time wondering why. He broadcast to all human ships. They are defenseless. Hit them with everything. The final assault was brutal and quick. Without their energy weapons, the Valdrin ships were just targets. Earth's kinetic weapons tore through armor that had no defense against simple mass moving at high speed. Railguns punched holes through hulls. Missiles found reactors and ammunition stores. The mighty dreadnought that carried the planet Cracker broke apart under concentrated fire. The weapon itself tumbled into space and was destroyed by a fighter pilot who put 3 missiles into it just to be sure. All around the battlefield, Valdrin ships were dying. Some tried to flee. Some tried to surrender. Most just exploded. Krell watched his fleet die around him and finally accepted the truth. He had lost. The humans had beaten him. His empire had sent 4,000 ships to conquer one primitive world, and that world had destroyed them. Only 127 Valdrin vessels remained functional. Krell knew he could not win. He could not even fight anymore. He gave the only order that made sense. All ships retreat. Full faster than light speed as soon as navigation systems are online. Get out of this cursed system. The surviving Valdrin ships jumped to FTL and fled. They left behind the wreckage of 3,873 warships and the broken dream of an empire that had thought itself invincible. Earth had won. 3 months after the invasion ended, Captain Jake Morrison stood in the rebuilt Deep Space Command Center watching Earth's new defense network operate in real time. The planet was now surrounded by 3 complete layers of defensive satellites, all built using salvaged Valdrin technology that human engineers had improved upon. Morrison had survived the battle when his ship was hit. The ESS Defender had been torn apart, but the crew capsule had ejected successfully. He and 18 of his crew had floated in space for 6 hours before being rescued. Now he was back on duty and helping to build humanity's future. Lieutenant Amy Carter walked up beside him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Morrison, and they stood together looking at the displays. Carter reported that Mars Colony had sent word that the first human-designed shipyard was now operational. They were building Earth's own fleet now, not just repairing captured alien vessels. Real warships designed by humans for human crews. Morrison nodded and took a sip of coffee. Across the solar system, humanity had transformed completely in just 3 months. The war had changed everything. Resources that had been held back by political arguments were now flowing freely. Countries that had competed were now cooperating. The entire species had unified in a way that had never happened before. The captured Valdrin ships had provided technology that would have taken humans centuries to develop on their own. Faster than light travel, advanced power systems, quantum computing, energy shields. All of it was being studied, reverse-engineered, and improved. Earth was not just rebuilding. It was evolving into something new. Something stronger. Admiral Krell's report to the Valdrin Empire had caused enormous chaos in their government. The High Council initially refused to believe that a single primitive world had destroyed an entire armada. They accused Krell of cowardice and lies. But Krell had evidence, recordings of the battles, data from the ships that survived, debris analysis from destroyed vessels. The Council sent investigators to verify his claims. Those investigators spent weeks analyzing everything. They interviewed surviving crew members. They reviewed tactical data. They examined the wreckage floating in Earth's solar system. Finally, they returned to the Empire's capital with their conclusion. Everything Krell had reported was true. One primitive species had defeated 4,000 warships using tactics and strategies the Valdrin had never encountered. The investigators recommended that Earth be classified as a serious military threat and left alone. The Empire's response surprised everyone. They did not send another fleet. They did not threaten revenge. Instead, they sent Ambassador Theln aboard a single diplomatic vessel, broadcasting peace declarations on every possible frequency. The ship arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system and stopped, waiting for permission to approach. President Helen Brooks consulted with military commanders and world leaders before deciding to allow the meeting. If the Valdrin wanted to talk instead of fight, humanity would listen. But the meeting would happen on human terms in a location humanity controlled. Ambassador Theln agreed to every condition without argument. His ship was escorted to a neutral station that had been built specifically for this meeting. The station had enough weapons hidden in its structure to destroy a small fleet if necessary. The meeting took place in Geneva on Earth because Brooks insisted the ambassador come to humanity's homeworld. Theln agreed even though it meant landing on a planet that had just destroyed his people's invasion force. He arrived with only 2 guards and a translator. Brooks met him in a conference room surrounded by soldiers from 12 different nations and representatives from every major government. The room was designed to be intimidating, and it worked. Theln looked nervous as he approached the table. Through his translator, he expressed the Empire's desire to establish diplomatic relations. The Valdrin Empire recognized humanity as a sovereign military power and wished to opt in peaceful communication. Brooks listened to the formal speech without expression. When Theln finished, she asked him a simple question. You tried to conquer us 3 months ago, and now you want to be friends. Why should we believe anything you say? Theln's response was surprisingly honest. He said the Empire had made an error in judgment based on incomplete information. The Valdrin respected strength above all else. Humanity had demonstrated considerable strength. More importantly, humanity had demonstrated the ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. Those were qualities the Empire valued. Fighting Earth again would be costly and achieve nothing. Better to negotiate and learn from each other. Brooks asked what would happen if humanity refused diplomatic relations. Theln's answer was immediate. Then we will leave you in peace and mark your system as restricted territory. The Empire does not seek to fight humanity again. There was fear in his voice when he said it, and everyone in the room heard it clearly. Over the following weeks, humanity debated its future intensely. Some nations wanted complete isolation, build defenses, and never trust the galaxy. Others wanted revenge. Take the fight to the Valdrin and show them what real war looked like. But most people wanted something different. They wanted to explore, to learn, to take humanity's place among the stars not as conquerors or victims, but as equals who had proven they could not be pushed around. Commander Lisa Hayes, who had been promoted to admiral after the battle, spoke to the United Nations Assembly about the choice ahead. She said the Valdrin had come expecting an easy fight and learned a hard lesson. Now the galaxy knew what humans could do when cornered. Imagine what we could do when we choose our own path. When we explore instead of just defending, we have the technology now. We have the knowledge. We have ships being built in orbit right now. The question is what we do with it all. The decision was made after months of discussion. Humanity would build a proper fleet and establish colonies beyond Earth. They would accept diplomatic relations with the Valdrin and other species, but on their own terms. Earth would enter the galactic community as explorers and traders who happened to have very good defenses. Any species that threatened humanity would learn the same lesson the Valdrin had learned. We do not start fights, but we absolutely finish them. Construction began immediately on 12 new colony ships and 30 warships. Mars colony expanded rapidly. A new station was built at Jupiter. Mining operations started in the asteroid belt on a scale never before attempted. Humanity was reaching out into space with both hands, and nothing would stop them now. Captain Kyle Sanders was chosen to command Earth's first true interstellar expedition. His ship was named the ESS Pioneer, and it was beautiful. Built using both human and alien technology, it could travel faster than light and defend itself against any threat. Sanders stood on the bridge as his crew ran final checks. They were heading out to explore systems beyond Sol. Make contact with other species. Show the galaxy what humanity could offer besides military strength. As the ship prepared to depart, Sanders recorded a message that would be broadcast to Earth. He said that humanity had warned the Valdren to run, and they had not listened. The Empire learned its lesson the hard way. Now everyone out there knows what we are capable of when threatened. But this mission is not about war. It is about exploration and discovery. We are going out as friends to anyone who will be friends with us. But everyone should remember what happened when someone tried to conquer Earth. We do not surrender. We do not break. And we sure do not make it easy. The stars are waiting and humanity is ready. The Pioneer jumped to faster than light speed and left the solar system. Behind them, Earth continued building and growing stronger. The Valdren invasion had been meant to conquer humanity. Instead, it had awakened something that had been sleeping. A species that had fought itself for thousands of years now had a common purpose: unity, exploration, defense. Across the galaxy, other empires and species heard the story of Earth, the primitive world that destroyed an armada, the species that refused to quit even when facing impossible odds, the humans who warned their enemy to run. Some saw it as a cautionary tale about underestimating unknown species. Others saw it as a challenge to test themselves against these fierce new warriors. But everyone remembered the message humanity had sent at the very beginning. Run now while you still can. It turned out to be excellent advice. The Valdren had ignored it and paid a terrible price. Now humanity was moving out into the galaxy, and the universe would never be the same. Earth had survived first contact and emerged stronger. The human race had proven something important to themselves and to everyone watching. When pushed, humans push back harder. When threatened, humans find a way to win. And when someone makes the mistake of invading Earth, they learn why that is always a very bad idea.